We look at rookie expectations for the Baltimore Ravens 2022 draft class with a very special guest next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And we're here, a Tuesday edition episode with our Tuesday guest, and Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. Spencer, a little over a week removed from the 2022 draft. That 11-player draft class continues to just look like an incredible job by Eric DeCosta and company. How you doing today?
Doing quite well, thank you very much. It was a really deep class, and they have a really deep draft class on their own. So 11 new faces head to Owings Mills among undrafted free agents, and it's going to be a very competitive training camp, it appears, in August in Owings Mills.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be fun to kind of look at what these rookies have in terms of expectations for that. We'll talk about that in the second and third segments. But first, Spencer, I want to talk with you about a couple of veterans who have been linked in some form or another to the Ravens. Obviously, the first one being Jarvis Landry. The Ravens did not take a wide receiver in the 2022 draft. They traded away their number one guy in Marquise Brown. So there have been some rumblings about, could the Ravens bring in a veteran type presence? And Landry feels like someone would be a pretty good fit, maybe a bit redundant with the skill set that the Ravens have at the position, but very, very talented nonetheless. And there have been reports that the Ravens have expressed some interest in Landry after the draft, and maybe that he wouldn't be returning to Cleveland. So how do you feel about Landry in Baltimore, Spencer? Is that something you would like to see?
It fits the MO for what the Ravens usually get at receiver, the kind of guys they like to bring in, the kind of veterans that they like to bring in. I think Landry has a little bit more juice still than the Jeremy Maclins of the world, and maybe not quite as much as a Steve Smith or an Anquan Bolden, but a physical, gritty receiver that likes to embrace yards after contact and yards after the catch and block and hit and be a veteran leader in a room that doesn't have one. So I think at this point, beggars can't really be choosers. There isn't a perfect glove fit of any player in this class other than Julio Jones, if he was maybe healthy, or Odell Beckham, if he were healthy. So both of them have monkey wrenches as well. But there's an element of a logjam at slot receiver that there has been in Baltimore for quite some time. James Prochet, Devin Duvernay, Mark Andrews, they bring in two tight ends that are going to play in the slot in different ways, and Likely and Kohler. There's a real logjam there. Tylan Wallace, a guy who plays a lot of snaps in the slot. Rashad Bateman can do damage in the slot. So it's a lack of outside bodies that can go win, threaten vertically, and go create separation downfield outside the numbers. It feels like Rashad Bateman's really the only guy that can do that with consistency. Tylan Wallace did it at times at Oklahoma State. James Prochet certainly has the competitiveness and the focus to be able to go make some contested catches, but not much of a vertical separator with speed. Duvernay, can play a flanker and run some guys off, but there's just really not a nuanced downfield threat on the outside aside from Rashad Bateman. So on one hand, it's fine to bring in Landry and have guys that can work over the middle of the field, have depth, have veteran leadership. Injuries happen, as we know, very much so from 2021. So for now, it's the hypothetical on paper of saying, oh, well, they've got all these guys that play in the slot, so there's no snaps for him. Well, in all likelihood, at least one, if not more, multiple of those guys will miss 3, 4, 5+ games. That's the nature of the beast. It's a physical game with a high injury rate. So beggars can't be choosers ultimately. Landry, Jones, Beckham all come with complications. Landry, a guy that does work best over the middle of the field, but beggars can't be choosers.
Right, yeah. And Spencer, what do you feel like a contract for Landry would look like? This feels like the Ravens can't really hand out one-year deals at will at this point. It feels like it would probably have to be a multi-year deal where you're pushing the money down the line a little bit. Would this be a 3-year deal to you that maybe might be 2 years in reality, maybe 2 that might be 1? What do you feel like it would look like?
Yeah, I think the Ravens would have to do a 3-year deal in ideal circumstances. It depends on what the numbers are for Landry, who's going to want some relative payday. I don't think he's going to be commanding, $15+ million or anything, but 20 million maybe total over 3 years, something like that, might get it done. And it really being a 2-year deal where the Ravens would push off. But it's a little sticky. Yeah, as you said, they really don't have much room for 1-year deals. It will seriously limit what they can do if another opportunity presents itself. And as much as Landry might be a nice player who could, help you win a couple games, I don't think the idea of limiting the ability to go get value before the trade deadline or another disgruntled player elsewhere or anything of the sort is Landry is not appealing enough to turn that off.
Right. And with him still being in free agency, obviously maybe he wants to play in the AFC North again twice a year, maybe play against Cleveland. Who knows what it might be, but I still a bit of a logjam at the slot receiver position, as you talked about, but the talent for Landry is certainly there, and he would, I think, be a pretty solid addition overall. But Spencer, moving over to defense, the Ravens took a couple cornerbacks in the 2022 draft, but there's a veteran who actually just got released by the New York Giants, and James Bradberry, someone who I know people have talked about for a little bit in terms of maybe Baltimore could go out and make a trade for him. Well, now the Ravens don't have to give up any compensation to get Bradberry. Do you feel like that would be a player you'd be interested in if you're Baltimore?
Yeah, I think the Ravens are definitely interested in Bradbury. Again, the same conversation of not being able to afford a 1-year deal tips its hand. And I think the Ravens can't ultimately afford James Bradbury. They could move money around. They could max all of that out, but it would be, again, limiting. And they're not at a place in terms of defensive backs where they're that dire. Do they need some depth? Absolutely. But do they want to be handing out yet another really big contract to another secondary player for they just drafted Kyle Hamilton? They just signed Marcus Williams. They have 2 paid corners. They drafted another one. It's TBD. I think that the price tag for Bradbury, who probably is going to get a lot of inquiries from teams like the Las Vegas Raiders, the Chiefs, among others, will be too high for the Ravens' liking, where it doesn't feel like they're getting value. And again, it's going to cut off what they can do if another opportunity presents itself for a pass catcher or an edge rusher or something of the sort.
Right. And do you feel like instead of maybe a Bradbury type player where that contract might be a bit bigger than maybe you'd feel comfortable with for a player like Bradbury, very talented, but would maybe you look to a veteran such as a Joe Hayden that might not cost as much for that depth that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think the Ravens will look to another veteran that is a little more cost effective. I think the 80-20 rule definitely will apply in terms of the late corner free agency, where you can probably get someone that can come step in a pinch and has experience. I think Hayden would be a really nice fit if he's got more ball left in him for himself, so to speak. So, yeah, I think they go the veteran route ultimately with someone aside from Bradbury.
Right. And I guess moving back over to wide receiver, because we talked a little bit about just the slot logjam. Do you feel like maybe because of that, a player like Julio Jones or Will Fuller or someone of that nature could be a better fit overall?
Yeah, I think that Julio or Will Fuller or Odell Beckham are all better fits for what the Ravens don't have, what they do need, and to have a complete offense where you feel like you can open up different parts of your playbook more so. But they all come with complications. Julio hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's definitely much, much older at this point than really anyone else or really any successful receiver in the NFL. So Julio comes with that. Odell is rehabbing an ACL and has had multiple ACL injuries, a lot of injuries at this point in time. Won't be able to be a factor until at least October, November, maybe December, or ultimately for the playoffs. But obviously having Odell is a great fit. And then Fuller, doesn't stay on the field, but fits exactly what the Ravens need very much so, and would be an awesome signing if it could be a really, really cheap deal if he's really not getting a ton of inquiries elsewhere, but it's hard to believe that his services would be, towards the veteran minimum. So all of them come with an asterisk or a complication or however you want to put it. But I think that those guys, in terms of what they can do when they are on the field, all fit a little bit better and would maximize the Ravens offense. Julio, before he started his ongoing injury situation, looked fantastic to start the year with the Titans last year, just couldn't stay on the field and is a lot older and a lot more beaten up. And all of those guys are in a similar boat.
Right. It's almost like you have to pencil in 4 missed games or 6 missed games with a couple of these players. So obviously the talent is there, but if you don't have the talent at your disposal to use for a quarter of the year or half of the year, it can get a little complicated and you're kind of scrambling again, or you're just back with what you had in the first place. So all these things taken into account for sure, but the Ravens do have options at the position and also at cornerback as well. We'll head into our first break here now. Then we get back. We'll be diving into some rookie expectations, starting off with the day 1 and day 2 draft picks. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about on Locked on Ravens. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about Bet Online. And our partners, Bet Online, continue to be the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and sports info. And if you bet on Nikola Jokic winning the MVP, congratulations. Jokic did win the MVP, which is great news to me, obviously, as a Denver Nuggets guy. But if you want to bet on the NBA playoffs that are still going on, unfortunately, without the Denver Nuggets, you can bet on that. The MLB is in full swing. There's a ton to bet on, of course, and BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting, the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. And Spencer, again, this 11-player draft class, the Ravens were really able to cook up. I mean, such talent on both offense and on defense. I do want to start off when talking about rookie expectations with days 1 and day 2. So let's start off just focusing on Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum, two players that I personally anticipate having big roles off the bat for the Ravens. Hamilton in particular, obviously the Chuck Clark situation kind of clouds things a bit in terms of just how big that role could be, but it feels like in this defense, Hamilton can play all over the field, can do a lot of different things. And then for Linderbaum, it wouldn't shock me if Patrick McCary actually opened the, I guess, official depth chart season as the number 1 center, and then Linderbaum is number 2, and then maybe Linderbaum takes over. But in my opinion, if you have a guy at 25 there who's super talented in Linderbaum, I think I'd be starting him week 1. So what are your expectations in terms of play counts, snap counts, and everything that these guys could play in 2022?
Yeah, Linderbaum, you draft to be your starting center. He certainly could, not work his way to that degree for the first month of the season or so. But I think after about 4 or 5 weeks, he will be the center when push comes to shove. I think that the Ravens like McCary as that 6th man, very much so. They might need him at left tackle to begin the season as well. So I think Linderbaum ends up being a full-time starter, definitely throughout the second half of the season, if not just week 1. So that's why he was taken. So Kyle Hamilton is a little more cloudy, but I think he's a guy that gets at least, 5, 6, 700 snaps. I'd say 600 is a safe bet. And that would be about, 45 to 55% of the Ravens defensive snaps, depending on how the season unfolds ultimately. But as things stand, Chuck Clark, a little gruntled, maybe not disgruntled, but he's reportedly seeking some sort of long-term commitment from the Ravens. And I'm not sure that they're going to give that to him at this point after drafting Hamilton. So if Chuck Clark is dealt, it feels like Hamilton likely won't come off the field a ton. We could see a little bit more Brandon Stevens or some Geno Stone and Tony Jefferson as things get started. Rookies don't tend to super crack the starting lineup week 1, week 2, week 3. But again, I think by about a month into the season, we're seeing Hamilton have a really strong role. We'll see him rotating out of 2 high, rotating deep into the middle field, middle third occasionally as well. I will definitely see him aligned in the slot and as a dime linebacker, probably down towards the outside shoulder of the tackle, playing a little bit of stand-up 5-tech type deal on some third downs as well. So I think we'll see Kyle Hamilton all over the field and just more snaps as the year goes on. So I don't know that he's going to roll out as a starter, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a guy that doesn't come off the field a ton towards the end of the season if he's able to stay healthy. So I think Hamilton definitely will be a serious player for the Ravens immediately, has a skill set and a polish to his game that feels pretty ready. So I think it would be a little surprising to see him not end up being that, 500-600 snap guy by the midway point in the season, taking, 20, 30, 40 snaps a game.
Right. Yeah. The talent Hamilton has, it's undeniable. And I feel like he will be on the field quite a bit. But you kind of mentioned the on and off with Chuck Clark, without Chuck Clark. So kind of diving in a bit about what you feel like, and I know it's so hard to tell at this point, but just what you feel like his role would be if Chuck Clark stays versus if Chuck Clark goes. How different is that for you? You mentioned he's probably not going to come off the field a ton if Chuck Clark goes, but where do you see him playing and everything with Chuck Clark on the team versus without him on the team?
Yeah, with him on the team, I think you find a lot more run in dime packages. He might end up being the dime backer, or you might be asking him to be that deep safety. I would think you want to stick him deep a little bit more so in some split safety looks out of dime at first, as opposed to asking him to go process underneath off the bat. But slowly that can become interchangeable. And I think we're kind of regardless of what happens with Chuck Clark, he's going to be all over the football field. You draft him because of his size and his versatility, which he displayed at Notre Dame. You definitely don't want to pigeonhole him into being a linebacker type. You want him to be a proficient defensive back. So trying to get the more so deep half or split shell looks and then moving him down into the slot a little bit more so than the true dime backer off the start would make a ton of sense as you're trying to make sure he does develop as a safety first and foremost. before asking him to do more complicated things. And Chuck Clark is really outstanding over the middle of the field, processing and able to do those things. But he doesn't possess the length that Hamilton has. So at some point, whether it's this year or next year, you want to see Hamilton be able to be that real long presence that can close throwing windows or make some pretty tiny throwing windows for quarterbacks over the middle of the football field. You want him to be aligned on tight ends, able to use that length and that frame to force contested catches and tight windows and make plays on balls and all that good stuff. So I think it's a little bit tough to predict, but if Mike McDonald is a disciple of Wink Martindale, we'll see both of them everywhere.
Yeah, it feels like there obviously will be things that change in the defense, right? It's a new defensive coordinator, but there will be some things I think that are left over from Wink Martindale's days in Baltimore that we could see, especially with guys moving all over the field. So I'm excited to see how Hamilton is used for sure. But Spencer, moving into day 2 of this draft, obviously pick 45 was David Ajabo, pick 76 was Travis Jones. Jones, I think, will be on the field a decent amount during his rookie season. Ajabo, I know it's a bit up in the air with his injury. So in terms of Ajabo, Spencer, do you feel like, and again, it's tough to tell right now, but do you feel like he will be able to get back on the field and make an impact at some point in 2022? And for Jones, how do you feel like he will slot into this defensive line rotation that has veterans such as Calais Campbell and Michael Pierce? And you also have some young guys as well, such as Justin Madubuike and Broderick Washington.
Yeah, I don't have the medicals myself, and I don't know if I know what to do with them exactly for Ajabo, but I think he was still a player that did need more development in order to get a lot of snaps regardless of injury. So that's going to be a difficult little boundary to get over in terms of getting him on the field on first and second down and in neutral situations where the run and the pass are both viable threats. Being able to get back up into shape and football shape, and for the first time NFL shape, is going to be a challenge. So I think it's a little bit more of a long shot, maybe not quite a long shot, but not great odds to see him come be an impact player in 2022. While it could certainly be possible he comes in, can be a designated pass rusher, get a couple sacks, 20-something pressures in the second half of the season. Definitely seems like it is possible, but in this race, you want to be better safe than sorry, and he does have some development to do. He is going to have to get back into shape, get strong enough, get his endurance up, get everything up, and work on his NFL-level technique in terms of shocking, peaking, shedding against the run, and able to lock out and hold his gap and be able to be a at least average run defender in order to see the field consistently. So I think there's a couple complications there, and I wouldn't exactly want to bet on him to be a huge impact player in 2022. With Jones, I think we're going to see a lot of Jones. You mentioned Broderick Washington, who I think is someone the Ravens do really like a lot more, one of the more underheralded or unheralded players in the NFL, I think, that did play pretty significant snaps last year and progressed pretty nicely. Showed versatility, showed the ability to be a factor in the run game, showed the ability to hold gaps and take on some double teams and hold his ground enough. So Washington, a guy that will get some run, but Jones definitely is someone that you want to come in on third down initially, be able to use those heavy hands and length as a pass rusher. I think they're pretty content using a guy like Derek Wolfe if he ends up being on the opening day roster or not. In those first and second down situations, they're content, throwing Michael Pierce on the field. They're content with a lot of those situations, but third down, I think we're going to see a good bit of Travis Jones, and I think we'll end up seeing him be a 40+ percent snap player by the end of the year. So being able to play 20, 30 snaps a game, get 10, 15 pass rushes per game, and make some plays. So I think he'll have a nice role and is a really pro-ready player.
Yeah, the Ravens have struggled to get consistent pass rush from their interior guys for couple of years now, so I think Jones will be able to help with that for sure. But Spencer, something I actually just thought of when listing out Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, and Broderick Washington. Who do you feel like of that group gets the most snaps, the second most snaps, and the least amount of snaps, and why?
I definitely think Madubuike leads that group. Madubuike has flashed so much and played really well against the run. Someone who might not ever be a big sack guy, might not be the 6, 7, 8, 9 sack guy. Feels like he's, to put it in terms of metrics or stats, he's a high pass rush win rate capable guy. I don't think he had a great one last year, but I feel like he knows how to beat a block, but doesn't know how to innately turn it into a pressure or a sack necessarily. I think he struggles a little bit with timing of when to disengage and how to gauge how deep the pocket is or where scrambling lanes are and some of those things. So definitely could take a step forward. I think he's an outstanding player that has all the potential in the world, has a ton of functional strength and ability in close quarters, ability in the run game, ability in space. He can run things down. He's so athletic. So I think we see him taking the most snaps. He's going to be a third-year player now, which is crazy to say, but excited to see what he can do. And then I think it's a little bit of a toss-up. I would guess I would go with Jones a little bit more so. He's a more supreme athlete. I think you want to see what you can get in pass rush. We'll definitely have every opportunity to move up the ranks in training camp, and him and Washington will be fighting for snaps. So maybe injuries ultimately settle all of that, but on paper, I would probably go Madubuike 1, Jones 2, Washington right behind Jones in third.
Yeah, that's where I have it too. And actually, Washington really impressed me last season. You kind of talked about how he's one of the more unheralded players in this league. I completely agree with you. We showed a lot of flashes. I know that he had a lot of the credit for that Calais Campbell blocked field goal in the Indianapolis game, so that was kind of a nice thing to see. But I think the Ravens have a ton of defensive line depth, and it's very balanced out. It's not just all veterans. It's not just all young guys. It's a very nice mix, in my opinion. So I'm excited to see how all those players are able to perform in 2022. But we'll head into our final break here on Locked On Ravens. When we get back, we'll be rounding out the episode with Day 3 expectations for the Ravens Day 3 players. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, I do want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto, though. And this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. And sometimes, with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it can be pretty impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. And sometimes there can be pointless or seemingly even intimidating questioning, and you have to wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer. And you can only really choose the brand the warehouse happens to carry. But now you have computers with access to rockauto.com, both at home and in your pocket with your phones. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. They're a family business, so they've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and the Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. Their website is really easy to use. You can go explore their website, find solutions you need for your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now, see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there, had you hear about us back so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here. Our final 7 of Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher. Your host, still here with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, we talked about the Ravens Day 1 and Day 2 prospects and their expectations in the second segment. Let's move into Day 3 now. And Day 3 was a hectic round 4, especially for the Ravens. 6 players drafted in round 4, and then obviously with the 6th-round running back in Tyler Beatty. But there are some guys on Day 3 who were taken who could really make some impact in their rookie seasons for the Ravens, and obviously beyond that too. But you look at players like Daniel Vallely, who maybe not much of an impact his rookie season based off veterans like Morgan Moses and Jawan James at his spot, but maybe a very good redshirt year for him, potentially. Jalen Armour-Davis, someone who could potentially get some snaps early on. I think the Ravens could use him in a bunch of different places. Then you have the 2 tight ends, Charlie Kohler, Isaiah Likely, who just thinking about where they could line up all over the field is really, really interesting. Jordan Stout, I mean, that one's pretty straightforward to me. He's going to kick the ball. It's going to be great. And then you have guys like Pepe Williams now, not Demarion, who could slot in to the slot role. Maybe he could play a bit of safety. You never really know. And then obviously Tyler Beatty as well, who I think could have a bigger role. So all in all, Spencer, how do you feel like these Day 3 guys could go in terms of their expectations and their snap counts and what you expect from them in 2022?
Well, starting with the big fella, I think Vallely is a lot less of a developmental player than made out to be, especially going from a similar scheme in Minnesota to Baltimore that does use a ton of play action and quick sets and runs the ball a ton, power run game a ton, some familiar rushing concepts. So think that there's a little bit of hyperbole about him being a developmental player, especially in a power gap play action scheme. So I think he'll have the opportunity to, get on the field a little bit in some jumbo packages and things. TBD, I think it would require injury for him to overtake Morgan Moses at right tackle, certainly this year. And the Ravens might move on from Moses next year. So I think that Moses is a perfect stopgap for someone like Vallely to polish his game, his vertical sets, make sure his body composition is ready and all of those things. So him, I could certainly see, being a viable option in the case of injury. McCary, tough to beat out there too as well. So we'll see what happens with the big fella. Jalen Armour-Davis, as things stand, is cornerback 3, probably. The outside corner. Brandon Stevens might be in more of that kind of hybrid role. And if something were to happen with Peters or Humphrey not able to get on the field, I would think Armour-Davis, pending, him being competent in camp, would end up getting at least a good bit of run and probably we'll see some snaps relatively early. I don't know, ultimately him being a heavily relied upon player, but think he will get on the football field. Marlon Humphrey has played better in the slot more consistently in the slot over the last couple of years. So if Armour has a nice camp and earns the trust of the staff, then he could propel himself up into that department. The tight ends, there's a dogfight. I mean, there's a loaded room. You've got Ricard, who plays a ton of tight end, Boyle, Andrews, and those two. I assume that, Josh Oliver is going to have a really tough time beating those guys out. Oliver didn't quite make the impact that I think many hoped he did, and probably himself as well, but looked really nice in camp last year and is more of a long shot. So the Ravens have a really full, robust tight end room. I think Kohler is the player that might be a little more pro-ready to go stretch the seam, line up in the slot and do some things. Likely can be a really fun player that can line up in split sets, line up in the backfield, line up all over, and be a little bit more of a fluid athlete that can help out underneath and after the catch and do some fun things as well. But both of those guys should have a pretty legitimate chance, especially in the second half of the season, to prove themselves. I see Kohler as real insurance for Mark Andrews. If Andrews is to miss time, I think Kohler could be a nice, cheap replacement for that role, at least. Not that he would be anywhere near as productive, but maybe eventually somewhat. And then likely, like I said, feels a little bit of a Jonnu Smith type, a little bit. I think that's a comp that's thrown around a little too much. I think Chiga Conquo was a better example of that, but I think likely can definitely do some of those things in the backfield. The punter, he gonna kick the ball for the Ravens now. I think Sam Cook's about done here. Stout apparently takes his holding very seriously and can potentially do kickoff duties. So we might see a pretty heavy dosage of him. And then in terms of Pepe Williams, he's going to fight for that slot, that starting slot spot. I think Brandon Stevens has the leg up, and they might ask Brandon Stevens to do some more things. But I think Pepe Williams will find himself some snaps in the slot. He's a super, super aggressive player that has a really nasty two-hand jam at the line of scrimmage. Not someone you want to really turn and run downfield and man coverage and go against more vertical threats, but underneath, playing some zone, blitzing, making plays in the run game, can do a lot of that stuff. So he's a super aggressive player that I think the Ravens are going to like a lot, and will find some snaps as well. And then Beatty, I think, is probably running back 3. I think Justice Hill, coming off an injury, someone that never really set out and became the player that many envisioned him to be, and towards the end of his contract. So I think Beatty, you go draft. He's a well-rounded player that can contribute in the pass game, a really nice pass blocker. I mean, I had the early 4th round grade on him, and they end up getting him in the 6th round. So I think he's someone that can contribute pretty early on. Nice runner, has good contact balance, has a couple gears that can run through, has a nice stiff arm, and able to do some things in the open field, and plays football. I think he'll be a good special teamer. I think he's going to find his way on special teams pretty quickly. He seems to have a really positive attitude about that, and I'm excited to see what he can do. So I think we don't necessarily see any starters really, unless there is injury from that day 3 group, but some guys are going to be chomping at the bit, and hopefully we're able to see a couple heavy rotational players that work their way into the mix on the field on Sundays throughout.
Yeah, I'm really excited about these day 3 prospects. And when looking at them as a whole, Spencer, I would really like to hear if you would maybe rank your top 3 guys from those day 3 prospects in terms of who you think will have the most impact overall. It seems like, Armour-Davis, with him being cornerback 3, could be thrust into some situations. You mentioned Baby Williams as well, but out of all those day 3 guys, who are your top 3 guys in terms of who could make the most impact in 2022 for Baltimore?
Of the day 3 guys, I think I'm going to go with Jalen Armour-Davis. I think he fits their scheme. I think they're going to be able to keep him on a vertical plane, which will be to his benefit. Someone who, not the loosest athlete at the stem when guys break their routes off, but can be physical. He is long. He can press. He can play off. Can run. Can hit. Can make plays on the ball a little bit. I think that's an area for definite improvement. But I think he is in the best position in terms of just depth chart as well as skill set to go be a contributor if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, he's my pick as well. And also I think that Pepe Williams could also have a pretty big role. And then I think Beatty would be my 3. I think that he would be someone who maybe if Dobbins or Edwards didn't come back right in the first couple of weeks the way he wanted to, he could really take some snaps as kind of that do-it-all running back who you mentioned could contribute in the pass game as well. So I'm really excited to see how the Ravens use all these guys. But also, Spencer, one final bonus question about the undrafted free agents. We know that Baltimore loves their undrafted guys, and they've brought in a lot of talented ones this offseason, and obviously a bunch of different receivers, some linebackers. But is there anyone from their undrafted class this season who you could see making this team and having an impact in 2022?
Yeah, I think all those big body receivers definitely have a chance. Wouldn't be surprised for the Ravens to be kind of expecting one of them, maybe a Devin Williams, to earn a job, earn a role, be that big body, be that power forward, be that outside contested catch body on the perimeter. The gentleman from Mississippi State, Polk, as well, I think has a good shot there too. So I would be remiss to think one of those guys. But other than that, Chuck Wiley at University of Texas San Antonio, definitely an older guy. I think he been in college since like Joe Burrow was a freshman. So about Joe Burrow's age, maybe, who was an older prospect when he came out too. So he's been around the block a while, went from the SEC to the Road Runners. I'm intrigued by his skill set for sure. I saw a good bit of him in 2020. And Zacoby McClain, the linebacker from Auburn, not the biggest dude in the world, but definitely plays like it. Not, a super fluid guy, but can sift through the trash as a linebacker confidently. I like the way he stays square to the line of scrimmage. I like what he can do in the run game, and think he has a little bit of athleticism to go make some plays in the pass game, but doesn't have a huge frame. So the big body receivers, Wiley and McClain, are the guys that stick out to me.
Yeah, we all know how much success the Ravens have had with their undrafted free agents and getting one or two of those guys on the roster for almost every season and having them make big impacts. And I feel like this could be a class, especially with some needs. You mentioned the big body receivers. They could really make an impact in 2022 if one or two of them do make up. Spencer, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for hopping on talking Ravens football. What do you have going on this week in terms of what you're working on?
Just continuing to grind the film, grind the tape, and waiting for the Ravens to have their next kind of hat drop, whether it's Justin Houston, Jarvis Landry, or someone else. So just continuing to chop up the tape. You can find it on Twitter at Ravens for Dummies. You can find me at BaltimoreBeatdown.com as well.
Awesome. And of course, all of Spencer's work will be in the description below on YouTube. So be sure to check it out and also hear him on the Baltimore Beatdown podcast. But Spencer, thank you again so much. That's all I have you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back in tomorrow, I'll be answering your mailbag questions. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you tomorrow.